Can I get approval on the minutes? All right, we got a minute stand without objection. Council, if you would take a look at your August 1st agenda, ordinances under final reading. If you have any comments or questions, please hit your light. Ordinances on the first reading be in committee today. Okay, take a look at your resolutions. Any comments or questions? All right. If you would take a look at your next week's proposed agenda. Any comments or questions? And I did have a question, item F of planning regarding the short-term vacation rental amendment. If someone could come and explain it, please.
I now have a couple slides I can show, but the amendment does a couple things. One is kind of some general housekeeping, and I'll wait for the presentation to come up. The zoning ordinance got amended several months ago. We started using it and just kind of noticed there were a few housekeeping items.
All right.
And that is the first part of it. Let me just...
Okay, and could you pull it up on our screen as well, on our screens?
And so there's, the first section is housekeeping and basically switching out the definition, just a few other things. And those aren't substantive changes, it's just responding to the new short-term vacation rental regulations. There's also a change based on the discussion that council had about UGC, all the UGC zones we've had with residential use only, and just coming from that discussion. The staff recommended Planning Commission, and Planning Commission's moving on a recommendation to add language there that says, for purposes of this division and the use of conditional zoning, absentee properties used for short-term vacation rentals are not considered to be a residential use. So we have lots of UGCs out there, as an example, residential use only, and so this is just saying for the use of conditional zoning, short-term vacation rental absentees are not considered residential use. And this was to provide clarity. We worked with LDO Partners and Chris Anderson just to kind of determine the best approach, and for enforcement purposes, just determining a little clarity. And then also, because we were, had some discussions, staff had some discussions with potential applicants who were going to be lifting that condition. The language in red there that says the owner applicant may not apply for a certificate within 18 months of lifting or amending conditions. So again, it's, if you want, because the intention was that there would not be rezonings to these commercial zones that council would be acting on. It kind of gets back to where council was originally. So this is just clarifying that if you're amending or lifting a condition to allow short-term vacation rentals, you'll have the 18-month waiting period also. And then this morning, we talked about it briefly at the kind of the agenda walkthrough, and Councilwoman Hill followed up with a note that the language there that's shown is struck through. Those are not zones that allow absentee vacation rentals, and just, it had been in the original ordinance and staff just had not noted that. So we're proposing that that language be struck through, and basically it applies to any commercial zone that allows absentee short-term vacation rentals. Because right now, Councilman Hill noted that the R zones kind of make it look like you could possibly do one there, and that's just for clarification. We would ask that the ordinance be amended to make that clarification too.
All right, thank you, Karen. Any comments or questions about that? All right. Okay, Councilman Smith, followed by Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hey, Karen, really quick, on the previous slide, just to go over this again, to be clear, the absentee properties used for short-term vacation rentals are not considered to be residential use. The purpose of this is what? Was this to make clarification on the tax implications?
This was not directly related to tax. We were thinking solely of the use, and our understanding that this was kind of a discussion with council that this had been kind of viewed as the absentees were kind of a commercial use. They were pointing towards commercial zones, and because we do have commercial zones that are residential use only, this is trying to be clear that those are not considered residential use. So we did actually not discuss the tax implications implications. We were talking about really how they function as a land use.
So then I have one follow-up question with that. Are there any potentially unintended consequences with enforcement, noise, things of that nature that we are explicitly enforcing in residential areas for residential purposes that, say, a short-term vacation rental, it would not apply to them if they are not to be considered residential any longer?
I am probably not the person to answer that, but we did talk this through with LDO, trying to understand it from a zoning enforcement, and that did not come up.
we
So I
get
don't have a good
clarification
answer for
on
that,
that
but I'm
first?
happy to get clarification.
I'd like to make sure we didn't just exclude them from that.
Yes, I will get
restriction.
clarification.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions, Councilman Smith?
No, ma'am, thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Burrs.
Mine's questions sort of follow the same line. Either they're commercial or they're not commercial. And I'm sitting here thinking, what did she just say? So try me again.
Okay, so if it's an absentee property being used for a short-term vacation rental, if the request, and you have a zoning condition that says you're in a commercial zone but residential use only, it's not going to be considered a residential use. So we do have several commercial zones, and again, the most common being the UGC zone, because we've used it for multiple
Okay, so
urban residential.
if it is considered a commercial use, then will it be taxed at the commercial rate?
I would defer to the city attorney on that.
Well, I know it's still out there.
As long as the state law allows us to do so, yes, ma'am. And as long as the assessor is willing to assess it at a commercial rate, yes.
I feel like I'm going up the down staircase. So I could do a lot of short-term vacation rentals in a commercial zone and be taxed at a residential rate. Is that? Yeah, I don't think so. So I'm trying to figure out.
I think that, so I will kind of give the non-tax perspective that staff is moving forward here, that when a council acts on a zone that is a commercial zone,
Right.
but has the condition to residential use only, in staff's mind, the intention is that function as a residential use only, single-family, multifamily. And so just to clarify, we were saying absentees don't count to that based on our understanding of what council was trying to accomplish with the distinction between absentee and kind of the homestay. So yes, it has a commercial zone designation, but that condition, we were feeling kind of takes away that commercial use and to reinforce the
Because it
residential
says
component.
residential only. I see people going like this and like this, and so might that be hard for people coming in to understand? I'm having trouble. I get it. So it's in a commercial zone, but it's for residential use only, except it's going to be for absentee landlords. So it's really going to be used commercial, but we don't call it commercial. We call it residential. I mean,
I think that you would be checking your zoning anyways for absentee because you can only.
no, I hear
Right.
what you're saying. I'm just thinking if that not confusing government policy making.
It is presented, however council wants to move on this, it went into the zoning ordinances tied to zones.
Sure.
And there was a lack of clarity, and this was our attempt to add clarity because we were starting to have zoning cases about lifting conditions for residential zoning. And instead of having kind of an enforcement policy decision, it was determined that amending the ordinance to be clearer might be the best approach, because then it's very clear that this is the intent of it.
Okay, I think
Sure, have
Dan
her
wants to
way.
tag in.
This is my understanding, and I've spent as much time thinking about this as you, very little. When you rezoned a UGC for residential use only, you or I could go live there. The moment we
Right.
turn it into an STVR, it becomes a commercial use.
That's what I just said, and I heard no.
That's not, no, that's the way I see it.
Yeah,
So
it
am I
does.
correct on
It's
that?
got to.
So if the moment you revert back from an STVR to live in it, then you're,
Then it's not. Yeah, I agree with you.
okay.
All right. Yeah, short-term vacation rentals.
All right, anything else,
Yeah.
Councilwoman Byrd?
No,
Phil, did you want to chime in here?
No, ma'am.
All right. I'll come back, Karen. Madam Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you very much. While I recognize that this work is about clarifying the zoning and ensuring that the spirit of any rezones that have been done is maintained. So we've seen a lot of rezonings in District 7, 8, and some in 9 as well, that the best tool we have for density is UGC. But our leaders from those districts have said we want them to be in residential areas, new residential areas. So I appreciate this work. I do hope that it furthers the strength of our conversation, our legal conversation about
Yes.
switching to a commercial tax regardless of zone 4 and absentee. And I appreciate Councilman Smith's question. I think where he's headed is, if we say somebody's commercial, are they allowed to be loud longer than in a residential area? So by virtue of having legacy properties that are absentee in residential areas, we have a little bit of a tricky wicket, but so goes the world. So I appreciate this step forward.
And we did try to clarify for the purposes of this division and the use of conditional zoning. So that might, trying to narrow, not all of city code, but just for division, I think it's 15 for short-term vacation rentals and how zoning conditions are used. But we will make sure there's not a conflict.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Karen. Any other questions, council? Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. All right, council, any other questions on next week's proposed agenda items? All right. Purchasing questions, we have 8 purchases and 4 emergency purchases. Any comments or questions? Okay, future considerations, any comments or questions? I did have a question about item A under human resources. If somebody could come up. Guess it's you, Jermaine. My question was, this morning in our review, I'd asked that, I believe we received a very lengthy document, and would we be able to get a one-pager with those updates?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you will. And so I think that Daniel is working on that now.
All
So
right.
yes, we will make sure to get that update to you.
All right, that was painless, that was all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for future considerations? All right. We have no departmental reports, but we do have 2 committees today. We have Public Safety Committee meeting today with Councilman Henderson, as well as Planning and Zoning Committee today with Councilman Smith. Following that, we will have an attorney-client privilege meeting. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilman Henderson.
All right, good afternoon. We will call to order our Public Safety Committee. Could I have a motion on the minutes? Without objection, those minutes will stand as recorded. So this afternoon, we are here to discuss some changes that we need to make to our Police Advisory and Review Committee ordinance. I do want to recognize our park members that are with us here this afternoon. I see Kay and Marion. Any others? Oh, yeah, okay. If you don't mind, stand and tell us, give us your name. Y'all do a great work, and I want y'all to be recognized.
Okay, I'm Christy Rashid, and I represent District 5.
All right,
I'm Lee Clear, and I represent District 7.
thank you. Thank you for being here.
Kay Baker, I represent District 2.
And Mary Ann Hensley, representing District.
All right, thank y'all for being here this afternoon. And we do want to give you an opportunity to address the council at the end of our presentation that we're going to have. And at this time, I do want to recognize Ms. Brooke Satterfield. I think she's going to come up and give us a brief presentation of kind of where we are, what the state law, the changes that how they're going to affect us, and then try to figure out a path forward. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes. We have a presentation. We could get the slides up. All right, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Councilman Henderson and council for letting us come and talk to you guys about the park today. I first want to echo what Councilman Henderson said about our current park members. They have, I know, worked extremely hard to sort of build out this system that we have, and so I'm very appreciative of their work, and then also for being here today, and look forward to hearing from them as well. So I have a few slides, just like you said, to bring us kind of up to speed on where we are. I am going to be joined at the podium by Chief Murphy, who is here, and then and Major Chambers throughout the next couple slides. So really quick before we kind of dive into the new legislation, I just want to recap what we briefly talked about last week as it relates to what you're going to be voting on this evening. So, and we'll expand on a couple of these throughout the presentation, so kind of bear with us as we get through this. But, so the moratorium tonight will temporarily suspend the existing park ordinance as it is not in compliance with the new state legislation that was passed earlier this year. So there is a date attached to the moratorium in October, and so that is when our ordinance must be in compliance with the requirements of the new state legislation, otherwise our park will be terminated. It is our intent to simultaneously be working collectively, collaboratively with all of you, with park members and CPD to address the areas that were out of compliance and work to bring them into compliance. And so the purpose of the moratorium is basically to allow the department to carry out the operational duties as it relates to internal affairs investigations and directing discipline as necessary. So currently, park is a step in the process for the department. So the current process is not in compliance with state law. Therefore, the moratorium is necessary just to ensure that the department does not have a several-month backlog of cases. We don't want anything kind of hanging out in limbo in the meantime while we're not able to finish or while we're not able to facilitate park meetings. Officers with sustained allegations should, get the final disposition and be handed the discipline as close to the incident as responsibly possible. And then officers with unsubstantiated allegations, we want to get closure on those as well. So this moratorium allows the department to move forward on those things. So going to where we are currently, we the administration, Mayor Kelly, I know all of you current park members and the police department, we are all, I know, committed to transparency, community oversight, and accountability. We are all working towards the same goal here to maintain transparency and oversight on behalf of all the residents that we serve. I said this earlier, but we have had an extremely positive experience with our park as it exists currently. I know that the department and internal affairs and park, I know there's a great relationship among all parties, and we're grateful to existing park members who have worked really hard not only to provide this important service to our community, but also to kind of build out what a couple years ago was a brand new committee and establish real credibility within our community. So I don't think any of us really intended on making any substantial changes to our park ordinance. We certainly didn't, but the legislation was passed by the state, so here we are. I want to be very clear that the administration does not have every answer figured out here, and it is certainly not our intent to impose a new ordinance on anyone, particularly without soliciting any feedback from each of you, from existing park members, and so on. We've been in a kind of a research and information gathering phase over the last several weeks, working collaboratively with police department, the city attorney, and Councilman Henderson. The goal has been essentially to sort of get an understanding of the new legislation and figuring out how it does apply to us. And then due to the timeline challenges, we just have kind of wanted to be helpful throughout the process and kind of get a jump start on some of the research before we move forward. I know that Knoxville has been discussed previously, and we have been having conversations with Knoxville Police Department about their park operations. This is because it appears as though the state legislation is largely based on Knoxville's model. So because it is an example of a police advisory review committee that is largely in compliance with the new law, we thought it was in our best interest to at least learn and understand how they operate in compliance. So we also recognize that we're not Knoxville, and so we've gone through this information gathering process just to sort of get an understanding of what they are doing so that we can kind of bring it back and make it better and make it fit to our needs here in Chattanooga. So we do have a general understanding of that framework, but we will obviously make improvements to ensure that our ordinance fits our needs and within the bounds of the law. So lastly, the new legislation, it is pretty prescriptive in terms of what our park ordinance can look like. It does not leave a lot of room for interpretation, and the state is extremely specific about the roles and responsibilities of the committees as well as any staff. So this is the start of Section 2 of the legislation, and this is essentially why it applies to us and what happens if we are not brought into compliance within 120 days, and it is that the current park will be terminated, and obviously, as you can see, this preempts any existing ordinance that we have in place. So, as quoted by the state, the summary of the bill abolishes community oversight boards, authorizes a municipal governing body to create a police advisory and review committee upon adoption of an ordinance by 2/3 vote at 2 separate meetings, establishes composition, authorities, and operational framework for such committees, including that no member of the committee is entitled to compensation, requires the mayor to select an executive director of the committee who is to be provided with support staff, services, office space, equipment, and supplies. So there are 4 major areas where the state has provided new requirements where our existing park ordinance and processes are not in compliance. These are not the only differences, but there are certainly subsequent changes that will be required to make. But these are the ones that are most apparent and require the most heavy lifting to address. So this is just an overview. I will not outline every line of the legislation, but after we get done today, I do have a one-pager kind of analyzing our current ordinance up against the new legislation. But the first one is the board composition. So subsection 2, or section 2, subsection C dictates that a committee must consist of 7 members appointed by the mayor and confirmed by a majority vote by you all. So there are several different requirements that are that are under the committee members that are very similar to our existing requirements for committee members. The legislation does dictate initial term lengths, as well as term lengths after the initial appointments expire. Committee members cannot be compensated, which is similar to what we have now. There are still training requirements and educational requirements for the committee members that are to be appointed by the board. The existing park members are obviously the backbone of this entire operation and have already completed the required trainings for service. So we would like to keep as many park members that are interested in continuing to serve. We are currently working on pulling together within the next week or so a meeting with the park members to talk through their feedback and also try and determine who wants to stay on the board and how many of those individuals we will be able to accommodate and move them over. We by no means want to start from scratch. They have done an amazing job, and we would like to continue to allow them the opportunity to serve on this board as they are interested. The next new requirement is the executive director. So the mayor must appoint an executive director, and that has to be approved by park members. So we obviously do not currently have a park executive director. There are several different expectations required under the new legislation as it pertains to the executive director. Cannot be a former employee of law enforcement within the last 12 months, but the executive director must possess prior investigative experience, such as would be possessed by an attorney or local law enforcement officer. There are several functions listed as well, but to highlight a couple, for the executive director, they can accept complaints from members of the public regarding misconduct of local law enforcement officers. The executive director is to be notified by IA when an investigation is closed and review the file and determine if the investigation is complete. The executive director can determine that a case should be further investigated or that additional information is needed. So there are several different functions under the executive director. And then the last two, I will kind of briefly talk about both of them at the same time before Major Chambers comes up. But the final two, we have open meetings and order of operations. So the subsections O and P discuss the allowable operational framework, which includes making the park meetings open and requiring park meetings to provide an opportunity for public comment. That is obviously quite different than what we have currently, as the current park meetings are confidential. So this the open meetings requirement essentially mirrors the rules that you all have to follow related to open meetings, publicly noticed meetings, allowing for the public comment, establishing the committee's own adoption of rules and procedures, and so on. And then subsection Q outlines several limitations for the park board and staff to abide by, one of which is when cases can be reviewed. So the committee or its staff shall not review an investigation prior to the closure of an investigation, and the committee or its staff shall not review an investigation concerning an incident that occurred prior to January 1st, 2023. So to go a little bit more into detail on kind of the changes that would have to occur to bring our park ordinance into compliance, Major Chambers is going to provide a little bit more detail.
Good afternoon, Council.
Good afternoon.
I just wanted to go over essentially first a micro overview, step by step of the process, and then we'll expand out as we go. And I'll try not to belabor any points. But essentially the way our complaints are received, they can come from either internal or external. External meaning a community member, internal meaning a member of the department. So a supervisor notices a policy violation or a community member complains about an officer's actions. Either way, those complaints come directly into internal affairs and they are subjected to a pre-review. And that pre-review determines the potential types of allegations that may apply to those particular actions. And that is where we split into two separate avenues of investigation. So our allegations are divided into two classes, essentially Class 1 and Class 2. Class 1 being the more egregious offenses, which are investigated solely by internal affairs. And then the Class 2 offenses are investigated by the individual's chain of command. So the complaint comes in, it's pre-revved, as we call it, by internal affairs, and then it's assigned to a sergeant, typically, for investigation. So that's the first step, is the report of investigation is completed, where the sergeant comes in, does the interviews, asks the questions, talks to the complainant, and does a fact-finding investigation, essentially, as what occurred. That report is then submitted to the lieutenant, and this tracks the same way in internal affairs. The sergeant in internal affairs does the investigation, and then that case, once it's completed, the investigation portion is forwarded to the lieutenant, where the lieutenant gives an overview, and the lieutenant's responsibility is to complete a report that we call a conclusion of facts. As you may understand, that a lot of our complaints, there's a lot of perceptions and things at the time. So the lieutenant's job is to read the totality of the investigation, review all of the evidence, and then determine, based on the preponderance of evidence, what actually occurred. To where what that does is it keeps a lot of the perceptions. That's the goal, is to keep the perceptions of what may or may not have occurred and rely solely on the evidence and the preponderance thereof in order to move forward. From that point, there is a little bit of a difference between the internal affairs workflow and the chain of command. The chain of command has a captain, whereas the internal affairs chain of command, they report to me as the major over professional standards. So I don't have a captain. So the captain in this role for the chain of command fills out a quality control. So essentially the captain's responsibility is to review the entire case file to make sure that all potential evidence, all questions that may need to be asked are asked, and all evidence is included in the case file. At that point, the case is forwarded over to the major. Same thing for the internal affairs. Once I get it from the lieutenant, at that point is the first time where an actual allegation is attached and a recommendation is made. So the recommendations are going to be that of sustained, not sustained, unfounded, or exonerated. I review those cases, so does the major over whichever chain of command, and we send that over to the assistant chief over that command. Same thing that I do. So even with an internal affairs case, once I make my recommendation, I forward that case to the assistant chief over the chain of command that officer reports to. The assistant chief reviews it, also makes their recommendation. In addition, they also make a recommendation of discipline. From that point, the entire case file goes to Park. This is our current workflow. It's where Park reviews it and then also meets with, usually for the internal affairs investigation, they're meeting with the actual investigator. With the chain of command investigations, they're meeting with either the assistant chief that made the final recommendation, the recommendation that proceeded, where it was met with Park, or sometimes the major will also sit in and kind of brief the case for Park, at which point that the details of it are discussed. Now, a week prior to the meetings with Park, they're provided the entire case file to give them a time to review all the details, at which point they can request to see any video, anything that's contained within that case file, then they have the ability to view, and we will show that to the whole group right there if there's any questions. From that point, after Park gives their recommendation, it goes to the either chief or executive chief, where a final disposition will be determined. And in the event of a sustained allegation, then it will be determined what type of discipline will be given out that may require a disciplinary hearing. And then that disciplinary hearing is held. The chief or executive chief will make the final determination on the case, and then the case is essentially closed after that. The way current law reads that Park would review after, or at the tail end, right after the process was complete, is the way the current law reads. So everything would track the exact same, with the exception of it would go from the assistant chief over the command that the officer that was being complained on reports to, go to the executive chief for final determination, and then it would be reviewed by Park quarterly. At that point, they would be able to review not only the whole case file, but also the actual final decision made by the chief or executive chief that concluded or closed the case. And this is more of the I guess, broader look at it. When it comes to, you have the current workflow where Park falls within the recommendation and within the investigative process, and then with the way the law is explaining that it has to fall at the end after final disposition. I did want to bring a couple things to light. I've been in my position currently for a year, maybe just a little bit over, and it didn't take long before I got to see the true value of our Park team. And I do want to refer to them as a team versus a committee, because that's exactly how they operate. It has been one of the most valuable assets to the department that I've personally experienced in my 25 years with the department. Some of the things that will not go away, some of the things that, regardless of the law, we will still be able to do. And one of the most important functions of Park isn't just the oversight, isn't just being able to look at the case files, but it's also their ability to make recommendations on training and policy changes, as well as we've had multiple incidents where they'll have very, very valuable input into some of the after effects of law enforcement actions that maybe they're in policy, but maybe there's opportunities there for us to reach out to families, to have more of an educational session of why we did what we did. There's a lot of value in that, and that does not have to go away. In addition, they'll be able to recommend if there's an aspect of an investigation that requires further investigation. That has happened on a number of occasions currently, and that doesn't have to go away. There have been times when Park has reviewed a case and been like, well, what about the supervisor in this case? We understand the officer and the officer's held accountable. What about the supervisor? And the response is, you're exactly right. So therefore, we look into that and investigate that as well. And that's happened, and I don't see any reason why that would have to change. As I stated, they would have full access to each case file to include all evidence contained therein. So they'll be able to review every bit of the evidence, the totality of the investigation, as well as how we got to that final disposition. The other thing that I think is extremely valuable is the relationship between the police department and the committee. We currently have a fantastic relationship. The input that they have is extremely valuable, and we really hope that that does not change. There is nothing in the law that would preclude that from occurring. That is something that I think we can continue to work towards and continue, especially utilizing the current Park Committee individuals, that we've become a team together, and I think that's something that I hope definitely continues. And that communication, while the public meetings are what they are, there's nothing in the law that would preclude the executive director from having one-on-one conversations with myself or the commander of internal affairs to ask specific questions about investigations. That's something that is allowable by the law. And then being able to maintain the standard of reporting. Regardless of what that looks like, I think there's opportunities there for us to be as elaborate as we want to be when it comes to the data that we have, the actions that are taken or actions that are not taken. I believe those types of reports can be worked out, whether we add to what we currently do or we keep it the same. And I believe Chief Murphy has a few words.
Councilwoman Burrs, I noticed I have a lot from you. Is that an old lot?
No.
You have a question now? Okay.
May I ask
Is it for?
the light went back there for Brooke and for the other person.
Okay. All right. Do you want to go ahead and ask it now, or wait for Chief to?
I just have a quick.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Brooke, does the law say no greater than 9 members?
No.
The state legislation,
Does it say no greater than 7 members?
It says
Yes.
7 members.
I will defer to Phil to confirm that, but it is 7 members.
It says 7 members specifically.
I know, but in law, does it say no more than 7 members?
It just says 7 members.
Shall have 7 members.
7 members. Yes, ma'am.
Do you read that as restricting as saying no greater than 7 members?
I read that as restricting the ability of the council to be able to make the appointments of those members based upon districts. It was specifically, at least included in here, to be mayoral appointments of 7 members.
Well, my question isn't a loaded question. Usually law will say no greater than. If it says 7 members and it's not council, it's the mayor.
Yes,
So can the mayor, they're all to be made by the mayor.
yes, ma'am.
Can the mayor appoint more than 7 members?
We would have to determine whether that would be conceived to be consistent with the legislation or not.
It's a question we ought to-
The statute says it preempts what we currently have and allows the mayor to appoint 7 members.
I would like to know, I would like an opinion on, it says, I don't read the law as saying no greater than. No, all right. So usually if it just says 7 and doesn't limit it to that, then I want to know, can it be more than 7 members?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. The next question I had was an executive director, Brooke, whose budget pays for the executive director?
Ours, the city's, we have not yet,
The mayor's office, it's not coming out of council budget, right?
well, we have not yet determined exactly all of the details on that, but no, it is not our intent to take that from the council's budget.
So, okay, so the executive director comes out of the mayor's office?
We have not yet determined where this position will live or where it will come from yet, but it will not be, there will not be it will not have budgetary implications for council.
All right, so one of the things that I'm understanding is that the power has been taken away from the council and puts totally in the executive branch. Is that how you all are reading? I'm not saying that's good or bad. Is that how you're reading it?
There are, more or less, there are, obviously with the appointments being moved from council appointees to mayoral appointees, yes, and I will note to that there are, for the mayoral appointments and for the mayoral appointments, it will still be required to be passed in front of all of you.
Okay, so I think the answer is yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So let me ask you guys from the police department, is the current system working well?
Yes. Oh, you have a new mic. I'm sorry, I was looking for
That's
it.
okay, Chief.
Councilwoman, let's go ahead and let the chief give her little presentation, and then I'll come back to you, and then we'll follow up on some of those.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this, Mr. Chair, is it looks like we're just doubling over and saying, okay, and letting the state preempt something that's very important, that we gave a lot of thought to, and then maybe taking something that's really good and not examining any further some of the questions I just had. And so I would very much like you to return to me once she's finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow that. I'm really just here to provide at least, as being the leader of the department, because this is a separate entity from the department. It's oversight about, what we do, whether it be our disciplinary recommendations and final dispositions, as well as any policy recommendations. And yes, to answer the point, your point, it has been working well. To Major Chambers' point, there's a good relationship there. And that's not to say that another model doesn't work. It just says that change is difficult because we like the way we see it and how we have it now. So I'm not going to speak ill of what the model looks like because we haven't even really fully developed the model under the state statute. But what I will say is that I'm very, very appreciative of the current park. And from the police department stance, we don't have a stake in the matter or an opinion to give on the matter. We just follow the law. And we're just going to do whatever we're told to be able to become in compliance with that, with the current voice of everyone that was in the old process. And I think that and if I haven't, I'll tell you that it's very important to me that the police department that I'm a leader of is consistent, transparent, fair. And I think I've made it apparently known that I don't have a problem with saying, there was something not done right here, and we're going to correct it, fix it, do what we got to do to get it right. And I'm also about best practices for the department as well. And so I'm not the person all-knowing for all things best practices, and so I lean in on not only just from my own training, education, or what I seek, in other departments across this country, and even sometimes it's internationally. I lean on what the perspective and the perception and the voice of the community, and that's where they come in. So I come from a department where that relationship was already set up. I do have experience with having a department that has an appointed executive director. There's a difference in this model and where I come from, the model there. But there are some similarities in both models to where I've come from. So I'm used to that executive director model. And what I'll say is the same relationship that we have in the old model, if we have to come into compliance with the state law, that will not change anything with the new model. And all I could do is just guarantee you that and make you feel safe in that space. I'm not cowering away from hearing the oversight of our community, because that's who we, they deserve a voice in this, and they absolutely, it's important to me that we're meeting their needs, not our needs. So I came up here just to kind of maybe, hopefully, give you some type of peace in knowing that, as it comes from the stance of this police department, regardless of what the model is, nobody's voice in this community is going to be in any way taken away, minimized, or anything like that. We're going to be in compliance with the law, and we're still going to have the same relationship with our community as it relates to this police department.
Thank you, Chief. I tell you, just hang close. What I would like to do before I open it up to the council, and obviously, I feel like we have maybe more discussion than we do questions, but I would like to hear from our park members that are here, and I think we need to hear from them as well. I'm going to ask Ms. Hensley if she has anything to say, or if any of the other park members would like to address the council before we begin discussing this ordinance.
Yeah, I'll have Ms. Baker come forward.
Okay.
She will have quite a bit, and you can certainly add on from there, but she's a former chair of the committee and very familiar with.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good
Thank you for
afternoon.
having us. As most of you know, my name is Kay Baker. I'm in District 2, and I was the former chair for 2 years over the park. I'm currently a voting member with a few years left under the current system. The current Chattanooga ordinance works. It works. The park members that you have assembled are diverse, passionate, committed, and very effective. We do not always agree with CPD decisions, and we do not rubber stamp their decisions. We are independent, but even being independent, as Major Chambers indicated and Chief Murphy indicated, we have developed very strong relationships, good working relationship with the police department, and we feel like we brought around big change, big positive change in the relationship between the community and the police department. Chattanooga deserves better than Senate Bill 591. I don't have a bone to pick with the council. You created the ordinance, you created us. It's working. I don't have a bone to pick with the police department. They have been fascinating and fantastic partners as we've learned to grow through this process.
But I'm here to express, strong opposition to Senate Bill 591 because while it claims to, quote, strengthen the relationship between citizens and law enforcement and to ensure the timely, fair, and objective review of citizen complaints, close quote, it actually does the opposite. It reduces community oversight to a non-existent, impotent, and ineffective paper tiger. Who am I to tell the legislature who drafted this, the legislators who sponsored this, that voted for this, and the governor who signed this, that this Senate bill is not even worth the 10 pages that it's written on? And here's why I feel confident in saying that. I do not brag about my background, but in this case, I'm going to have to, because I have very strong opinions about this, and this is why. I was a former federal law enforcement officer. I was a former assistant attorney general that represented state law enforcement officers in Georgia when they were sued in federal court under civil rights legislation and litigation. I was a former assistant attorney general representing the Georgia Peace Officers Standards and Training Council to review and settle certification disputes of law enforcement officers who were accused of violating the law and their agency policy. I was a former assistant attorney general working closely with law enforcement agencies prosecuting misdemeanors and felonies. And since 2015, I've been a private investigator working criminal defense cases, as well as working with local attorneys who represent state and city law enforcement officers when they are sued in federal court, So 24 years in state and federal government, either in a law enforcement role or representing law enforcement officers in their official capacity, and 8 years as an investigator with an up-close and very personal view of police behavior, both bad and good. So if anyone of all of us is entitled to have an opinion on how to run an effective review committee, I think I'm one of those people. There are 8 others, trust me. We all have the right to speak out about this. Senate Bill 591 is a colossal failure with their stated objective. I appreciate I'm preaching to the choir, right? So my message is directed to our state delegation. I don't think they're here. The legislators who sponsored Senate Bill 591, the legislators who voted for it, and the governor who signed it, you have failed. You have failed your constituents. You have failed law enforcement officers who effectively, legally, and within policy protect and serve our communities. And you have failed the state. You have failed because Senate Bill 591 takes away the committee members' abilities to review an internal affairs and chain of command complaint before the chief has made a decision, effectively rendering any review or opinion moot. Senate Bill 591 creates a paid position for an executive director who is the sole decision maker for the entire committee on whether an investigation has been completed. And that's the only power that position has, is to decide whether it's been completed or not. And just as a reminder, although it's already been stated, under your ordinance, we review these decisions, these cases before the chief, and we make a recommendation on whether a specific officer violated policy or not. The Senate Bill 591 gives us nothing. And I appreciate Major Chambers mentioning that we have effectively worked with them to make some policy changes, and he's right, that's still in there. But how in the world, in an open meeting, are we going to be able to discuss fact-specific cases that would give rise to a change in policy? We can't. They have tied our hands because it requires that not only the executive director, and you could 7 figures, I would not do that job. It's worthless as a job. No authority, no responsibility in terms of transparency and strengthening relationships. The ED and all community members must maintain confidentiality of internal affairs complaint, at the same time demanding that our meetings are open. How in the world can we just discuss officer behavior content specific, to make any kind of policy change or recommendation for a policy change. We can't do it. The result? There will be no substantive discussion of officer conduct that might lead to changes in policy and/or punishment for the offending officer, which has been taken away from us anyway. We can't weigh in on whether the punishment for the officers. And finally, Senate Bill 591 gives the authority of appointing 7, not 9, which is what we currently have, to the mayor. You have to approve it. And we appreciate the city working, the city mayor's office saying they're going to meet with us, and we've gotten the invite, and that's on the schedule in whether we want to stay or not. But the fact of the matter is, the mayor, he or she, could appoint up to 2 people from one district, which could effectively, worst case scenario, leave 5 districts without a community representative. Okay? Worst case scenario, granted, but that sometimes happens. As a sidebar, the legislative fiscal note that we got in our packet, which is from March 2023, noted that the Oversight Board in Nashville had a $2 million budget. You know what our budget is? Lunch and free parking once a month. They want to add an expense, a fiscal impact on the city, whatever bucket it comes out of. It's an additional cost. And again, good luck finding somebody that's worth that position for less than $100,000. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know who would do it. So it adds the benefit, or the salary and the benefits of the executive director. Now it's open meetings. We need transcriptions. We've got to do that. It allows for public comment. We've got to allow that just like you. In closing, the sponsors of Senate Bill 591, the legislators that voted for it, and the governor who signed it do not want transparency in police misconduct. They do not want honest and community-driven evaluations of police conduct and policy. Senate Bill 591 eliminates any hope for a true strengthening of relationships between communities and the police departments that serve them. And maybe that was their plan all along. I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know what's going on in Nashville, but somebody doesn't want community input in police matters. What's insulting is that they hijacked language from your ordinance, almost to a word, but they took out the sections that gave our park the ability to successfully work with CPD, to offer valuable citizen input, strengthen relationships, and bring about effective change. Even worse, no one even reached out to us to see if it's working. And if it's not, why not? So whatever you have to do, we are asking you to please do it, because Senate Bill 591 is nothing more than a paper tiger, and it's not worth the paper it's even written on. So make your phone calls, call the delegation, tell them, why are they trying to fix something that's not broken just because they're mad at Nashville and Memphis?
Thank you, Ms. Baker.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask real quick if there are any other park members that would like to address the council this afternoon.
You did a great job.
It's a tough act to follow, I tell you, Kate. My name is Lee Clear. I'm the owner of WNOO Radio. And as I say, it owns me, actually. I'm a slave to and I'm the District 7 representative for the Park Committee. I've served 3 years on the board, expiring August 1st. And I'd like to compliment Chief Murphy and former Chief Roddy on their administration and training of the police department. It's a great department. It is a very professional operation. You see some of the other departments around us, and they're heads and shoulders above some of the other departments. After serving on this board, I see that most cases, they get it right. We review the cases, and in most cases, very few cases that we disagree with them on. You might think that we just agree with everything they say. It's not it. It's just that usually we agree because their findings are very thorough. And some cases, I think they may be a little too thorough. It's very, very difficult being a police officer. And I think that we treat these guys like robots sometimes. I mean, they're human beings. They have conscience and emotions, and they have things that bother them, and you don't know what they're going through. They left the last call when they come to the new call, but we still expect them to get it right every time. And that's not realistic, in my opinion. I've got a lot of family members in law enforcement, and nieces and nephews who are assistant DAs, federal prosecutors, and I've heard the stories. I know some of the things that they have to go through, and we kind of take that under consideration, even in our committees. We think sometimes that we're dinging the guys, and hey, he's a human, so he used a bad word. We all use bad words, but they're not allowed to do that. And I think sometimes I understand that the supervisors expect them to act a certain way and be a certain way, but they can't always do that. And sometimes I think we have to just, if it's serious, you got to do something about it. But if it's just minor, you have to maybe kind of look the other way. One thing I think also that everybody needs to understand is that we are the Park Commission. We make advice and review. In addition to reviewing things that are done, we also make recommendations for things that should be done. For example, we made recommendations that all police officers should always have a body-worn camera. If you're working on a side job at Wendy's or wherever you're working, you're still a police officer, and we need to have that camera to see what's going on. Because if you smack some guy, if there's a use of force of some sort, and the public says one thing, the police officer says something else, there's no camera, how do we know? You don't know what to do with it. So we need to make sure that all of those guys have body-worn cameras. And we're told that, well, hey, he's an investigator, but he's still a police officer. So we made that suggestion sometime in the past. Chattanooga can be very, very proud of the work that the park performs. In addition to the complaints, such as discourtesy, which is probably the number one complaint I see. He was discourteous to me. I don't like the way he spoke to me. And of course, the camera will show he didn't speak discourteous to you. He was not racist with you. What are you talking about? But we don't know if we don't get the camera. Obviously, I don't want to push that too much. I urge you all to swiftly move to reconstitute this board and bring it in line with state law. And I don't know how we do 7 members to a 9-member council. I don't know how they're going to do that. Maybe Phil in his wisdom can find a way to, get to the state and to find out if there's some way to kind of modify that, because we have 9 districts, and of course it's not fair for 9 districts to have 7 representatives, whereas Kay said maybe 2 from one district, and 3 from one district. I mean, the mayor can appoint who he wants to appoint. That's really all I got to say. I want to tell you that I've enjoyed really serving on the board, and I'm out August 1st, and it's been quite an experience, and I've enjoyed it immensely, and I'll do anything I can to help, okay?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Did any other, okay.
Real quick, I'm Kanika Jones. I'm a member of Park, and I represent District 9. I'm also worked in human resources for 20 years, so I have expertise in talent development, talent acquisition, and employee relations. I have 2 sons who want to be police officers. And so like any mom, I've encouraged their dreams to become police officers. And I've always told them to, if that's what you want to do, do it. And at the wake of George Floyd, my boys began to change their minds. They began to associate the police with racism, with violence, with the system that is not meant to protect them because of who they are, how they look. So like a mom should, I talked to my boys about that. And then I looked out into the community because I wanted to do something more. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to make a change. I wanted my boys to know that they didn't have to compromise their dreams. So I got involved with my city councilwoman and became a member of PARC. It's important for me to help bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement because of my children. And this committee, I've learned so much. We've built so many great relationships with law enforcement. We've spent countless hours reviewing footage, making recommendations, things that, I think that the police department at one point wouldn't have thought about, doing, but they welcomed those recommendations in, and we've been making a difference. We've made so much progress within our community, and I'm constantly in the community. I'm constantly doing things in the community, so I'm able to take these things back that we learn from each other into the community and help change the minds of people in our community, especially my community, who believe that their complaints are dumped by the wayside. They feel like they don't have a voice. And so we've been able to change that through the work that we've done with PARC. I believe that these changes that have been implemented will set us back. It will damage the work, the progress that we've set in place. The changes do nothing but add more limits, more restrictions, more red tape, more control, and it confirms the thoughts of what the community is already having. That, there's too much control going on, that my complaints don't matter. It's difficult dealing with a critical public and a self-regulating police department. So PARC is that middle ground. And so I'm definitely in opposition of the changes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Mrs. Christy Rashid. I represent District 5. Isaiah Hester is our councilperson. I'm coming as John Q. citizen. How can 7 people represent 9 districts? What we've established here is a deficit. This group, our team, we work together. I'm standing as a parent who had a son murdered in 1994. We're just celebrating his death date Saturday. I can see a difference in our police department that I'm working with now than from back then. I think we've made great changes, but Chattanooga's talking about a one Chattanooga. How can we be a one Chattanooga if we have 2 districts not represented? I think all voices are very, very important. And I think this bill is built, as Kay said, to take away the voice of our community. I thank you all for your time. I want you to know this team is very well needed here because of the diverse nature of this team. It's not a rubber stamp team. We can agree to disagree and still leave the meeting, love each other, and still communicate. So please, whatever you all can do, if you have connections in Nashville, let's contact them and let them know. And also, when the mayor is making his decision, because it's being taken from your hands, let him know the people that you want to work. I've been on this team from the inception. I was the first African-American woman approved for this team. And I thank you all for your investment in me. I retired from the Electric Power Board with 38 years of service to our community in the customer service. And I presently serve as Lake Hill's president. And I'm also a representative of Moms Demand Action, which I will be deployed in Chattanooga next week to represent that. So I'm letting you know I work well with our police department, and I'm very proud to say I am a part of the team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Marianne Hensley, Chair of PARC in District 3, and I'm really just happy that you all got to see a bit of the community, I guess, that's represented across this board and the passion that we have for the work that we do. And thank you all for, appointing us, for making this happen, for giving our community a voice that we've not had. And obviously, there is some fiery passion around, that voice being mostly taken away. I just want to echo both Kay and Major Chambers' comments about just the trust that we've been able to build. When this board was formed and we did our ride-alongs with the officers, there were a lot of questions, and there were a lot of officers feeling like this was just people breathing down their neck, scrutinizing every move that they were making. And over time, they've gotten to see this board is just as much about, holding them accountable as it is about protecting them, when they're doing good jobs. We had the opportunity to review a meeting with kind of within the guidelines, I guess, of what the Senate bill proposes. And so I just want to speak a little bit to kind of what that could look like. Obviously, there were no case reviews. The meetings are going to be open to the public, yet all case details have to remain confidential to the public. So how do we have meaningful discussion? The public has the opportunity to provide open commentary around these different issues. What we saw, a lot of those issues were completely out of the purview of Park. It was just people that came in and wanted to complain about something, and these people are volunteers, and it just opens the door to a lot of scrutiny around a committee that's meant to serve and to hold people accountable. And this really, we feel, kind of takes that away and also muffles, I think, the impact that it has and opens it up to more scrutiny. As Kay mentioned, the chief decisions are already made by the time they ever get to us. That really removes a layer of accountability and kind of removes us completely from the process. If we get to recommend things on the back end, there's no guarantee that those things are ever going to happen. And so with the current partnership that we have, we do feel that we really have a voice. We feel like we're really integrated into this partnership. We've built incredible relationships with CPD and the chief, and it's been an honor to serve in that capacity. But you can see that we are all pretty passionate about the implications of having these changes come into place. And so while we recognize that these are not on you and they are not your decision, we do ask for anything that you're able to do, anyone that you're able to speak with, to bring more attention to the matter, because it's one that was pushed through pretty quickly, seemingly on purpose, before anybody even had a chance to understand what was happening. And so I will close with that, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other committee member that would like to come to the podium? I do want to recognize District 1 committee member Dee Visser for being here with us this afternoon, who is recovering from hip surgery just last Monday, correct? Thank you for being here. All right, council, what I'm going to do at this time, Chief, did you have, okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to belabor the point. I just want to say it's so important to hear people's opinions and their voice in the matter, and I'm extremely moved by everything that I heard today. And I can't, I don't have a voice in what ultimately happens here, but nothing in the new model under this new law stops me from making you all feel any differently than you felt about the old model. And I vow to you that that will continue to be the relationship that we have. Nothing stops us from doing that in this law. And it doesn't, I know it doesn't change you, and the pleas that you've made, I hope the best. I honestly do, because I don't want to change our current relationship. But what I can vow to you is, if we do have to remain within the model with which is being presented to us in the new state law, that you should not feel any difference in the relationship that we've had previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, council, what I'm going to do is just open the mics at this time and then just call on the individuals that are in the queue. But I did tell Councilwoman Burrs that I would come back to her.
Thank you.
So Councilwoman Burrs.
Continually disappointed with state preemption and disrespect for our city and the way it works. It hasn't just been police, it has to do with guns, it has to do with a number of things that are not in the best interest of our community. And somehow, the state gets away, our representatives get away with not representing the best of what our community can do. And that's so disappointing to me. We have probably, through the work of our police chief, of the members of the police force, one of the best police forces in the state, who have shown respect, who have grown and changed, and it's happened in consort with the wonderful people on the park who have been terrific in making suggestions. Kay, you couldn't have said it any better. You took a beautiful legal approach, and you're absolutely correct. I think that this new law is nothing but smoke and mirrors. I think it all started with anger with Nashville and Memphis without any respect for Chattanooga and the wonderful things that Chattanooga does. I'm very proud of my city. I'm very proud of this council, proud of our mayor, and exceptionally proud of our chief of police and the police department. I would hope very much that we don't just bow down once again and take a stand, figure out how, as the chief said, we can continue on our course within the bounds of law. That was my question to you, Phil.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the limited. I don't see that in law. I think that's something we need to look at. I think it's very difficult to ask people to serve if we have to follow all of that on a sham committee. In other words, it makes it look good, except there's no substance. So there's got to be a way, Chief, that people can continue to work together. I believe the thing that's taken most of the power away are all the open meetings, because then nothing can happen, because these are very private and very crucial investigations. There was a comment made about the executive director. The executive director can meet with the park. Phil, does the executive director's meeting with the park have to be public?
Yes.
All right, so I think if you go to each one of the phases of this bill, it's meant to totally neuter what we in inception thought would be, and turned out to be, a terrific police-community partnership. And for that, I'm very sad, and I hope that we don't just sit down and say, okay. I think we do more than that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Listen, it ain't no secret how I feel about it. I'm really disappointed in it. And as I stated last Tuesday, is that, I have all the confidence in Chief Murphy and her decisions, but I really worry about our police union when they undermine her decisions. That's my concern. And we've seen that time and time again. And as I look through the bill and have went over it time and time again, it's really talking about the accountability of the people that serving as committee members. That is making sure we're holding them accountable, right? And the role and the things that they're supposed to do. And making sure that the committee understand that part of their role is to make sure they're upholding the rights of the police officers. Right. And it's so much go into that, and we can back and forth about what the rights of the police officers should be, but it really takes the voice of our community members away. And I too, like Kanika, that live in my district and have heard from other people, you know, our why and why we even created it. And since May 2019, our council, we went kind of back and forth. We got some new members and dove back in it again. And just to see 4 years later, after all the work that we've done on it, and we all come to a consensus about it, that the state is saying, we're going to take all of that away from you. We're going to like Councilwoman Byrd said, like it's very frustrating that our state is not held accountable in their actions and what they do because they're running our city, right? We only have about 2 or 3 of them that's there, but we are sidelined by this. I don't think anybody spoke up in behalf of what we do have going on. And, you know, the ones that we do have, I can very much say confidently that they agreed with it, that they agreed with it, and we know why they agreed with it. And if they want to call themselves chin checking me, tell them to come see me, and we can have some discussions about it. But also, Kay, you made a statement that was very moving. You said, who are you worth to tell the Senate that that bill is trash? You worth everything. Just like you stood here and said that you want all 9 of us to contact the state legislators, I want you to call them too. Not just the people that's on the park board, you rally up and get your people in the community, the city of Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, and you get them to go up there and advocate for it. That's how you effectively make change. Why? Because they're not listening to the 9 city council members here. When they preempted the bill and they moved it out of our wheelhouse and said it's up to the mayor, they told us our voice didn't even matter at this point. That's what they said. So we need people like you, boots on the ground, to email them, to call them right along with us. Get you a busload of folks, see when it's gonna be back, when you can come and you can speak publicly about it. That's how you effectively make change. Just because we got sworn in as elected officials to represent the community, that don't mean that your voice was removed, right? Your voice is just as mighty as ours is, and I'm sure that, you know, the ones who is against it will call and do that same advocacy too. Call Bill Lee, ask for a meeting with Bill Lee. He represents you too, right? It's, all he can do is say, I'm not available. Well, let me meet with your chief of staff. Read these emails that I'm sending. Send in handwritten letters, whatever that you need to do because you matter, just like everybody else do. And Memphis and Nashville are very progressive in everything that we do. But what we do from time and time prior to me getting elected, while I've been elected, we allow them to smack us around as if we're nothing. And we just sit back and say we're gonna take it. We don't push back. And I just spoke about this earlier, like we gotta start fighting back. We gotta be the ones to say, listen, we ain't finna do it. Well, you either gonna take us to court about it, or we gonna drag it out. That's what we got a city attorney for. That's what we got a city attorney for. And I get that, and my question is to Brooke, and I'm gonna be quiet, cause see, I feel some kind of way about it. When it say that we're supposed to be building relationships with our citizens in the police department, yeah, we trying to build and do all that. Are we perfect? Do we have a perfect police department? No, because until I see the racist police officers that's beating black people down and pulling them over for any little thing, get out and interact in the community with our kids, then that's when I say we done made some great milestones. But I don't see those police officers in the community doing that. I see the same ones that we see every day that come down here and talk to us that's out playing basketball with the kids or out feeding them every once in a while. We need to see the ones that's got the issue with the skin tone of the people and have them out in the community. That's how we gonna effectively change. But Brooke, as I come through here, the legislation, the bill, you mentioned and said that we will pay the executive director. Can you show me where that's at? Well, Brooke, did she leave? If you could show me where it's at in the legislation, because I don't see where it says that we will pay an executive director. It does say that the mayor may appoint an executive director, but in our current legislation, the executive director will be doing the same exact thing as the chair does. But what I do see that we're responsible for is that we're the legislative body, which is city council, we're responsible for paying for the background check of whomever the mayor selects, appoints, and upon the approval of the committee, we're responsible for paying for their background check and all of that. But it doesn't say where we're as a body or the mayor's office should create a paying position for an executive director.
I will defer to Phil on the specifics of the legislation.
I got the legislation. I know how to read. It doesn't say it, but Phil.
The aspect for the executive director is at least set out in the code section, and here it looks like, what's my number here? I've got, I can give you at least a red line version of this that I prepared, at least in connection with the meetings on here. And the red line version of the code at least talks about the responsibility of the executive director. Pretty plain and simple. K is correct. Even if you pay somebody a whole lot of money, this is a whole lot of duties that they have to at least be a registered voter of the city, not be a former employee of law enforcement within a certain time, possess prior investigative experience such as would be possessed by an attorney. They've got specific requirements that they have to meet in connection with the state law here in order to be the executive director. And it is an employee of the city in that regard, so they would have to be paid a specific amount by the city of Chattanooga in some budget. That's one of your problems in connection with this act, which was passed on July the 1st of this year, right after you passed your budget, as to how you can get somebody to be in that position. But the mayor's office would have some responsibility to at least establish someone who would be willing to accept that position and be able to review the items that they're required to do. And that's set out clearly in the statute.
Can you email that new
Yes, ma'am.
one out, because the bill that I have, it doesn't say anything about paying. And also it doesn't say in HB 0764, the House bill, neither states that as well. So, I mean, we need to see what the amended version was, if they had an amended version, or was that just a version that we created, not us, but our administration created to
Yes,
pass
ma'am.
to us. So if we're gonna go by the state version, the state version says there is no compensation. It doesn't mention compensation. So that I wanna make sure that if they're gonna create things for themselves, then that means we should be able to say, the mayor should say, well, we can create 2 additional other people if we're gonna create a salary for the executive director that's not included in this legislative law.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
I think you're going to have a real difficult time getting anybody to do that position without paying them something.
Hey,
That's the way it works.
we doing it for 20,000.
Mr. Chair, if I can speak, Knoxville is the model that they're using, and Knoxville's executive director is a paid position. She also has an investigator. Now it's a he.
Yeah.
So even if it doesn't specifically say paid, you are not going to get someone to do all this.
I'd rather you come to the podium and address the council if you would.
Do you want me to say that?
Well, I mean, if that's all you got to say, but
Yes.
I'd rather we direct all the comments from the podium. Phil, if you would you email the
I would
entire
be glad to,
council
yes.
that legislation there
Yes.
that you were referring to? And maybe highlight
The sections.
the section about compensation.
Yes, sir.
Councilwoman Coonrod, any further comments?
That's all I have, other than just saying that, you're right, Kay, you're not gonna find anybody. But I feel the same way about council. We serving on 20,000, but we found 9 people who saying we wanna do it. But Knoxville was created prior to this legislation, and hey, if we gonna pay somebody, then let's pay somebody. I'm all down for it. But my point is saying, if we're gonna go by what the state says, and we're just gonna create other things outside of that, then we need to push the envelope to make sure we're getting 2 additional people to serve as well.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilman Hester.
Thank you, Chair. Through challenges and changes, our struggle continues. Park has spoken. I feel your pain. I want to publicly thank you for your devotion, your dedication, your passion for what you do. I want to thank the police department. And it was noted that there's a good working relationship with CPD and Park. Thank you. Thank you for your service. I know we'll rise up again like we always do. Chattanooga will rise up to the occasion. So don't be dismayed. We'll rise up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to vote in favor of disbanding our park. Where did David Floyd go?
He's good.
In the car.
The whole time. David, this conversation has been an excellent insight, has offered excellent insight into the reality of preemption in the state of Tennessee. And I think it would be an excellent investigative piece for the Times Free Press to dig into how many laws are passed just in the last year, pick, or 2 years, however many you want to pick. How many laws have preempted things that people at the local level have made decisions on already, and how our local delegation has voted on those. Because they are accountable to the people in our city and in our county, and yet, to my colleagues' points, they vote against the interest of our cities and of our counties and of our schools on a regular basis. So I think you have a real opportunity there. Go win an award. We have multiple branches in our government. Obviously, we are in the legislative branch, and I would like us to consider where the judicial branch plays in this conversation. Chairwoman Dotley, I would like to request that we have a roll call vote on this ordinance tonight, and I hope that I will not be the only one who votes against it. What you all have brought to us, what you've said, both the park board and our police department, the strength of your statements about the way that this is working and the reality that our neighbors want to know that everyone in Chattanooga is safe as they move about the city and as they are in their own homes. You all are doing that work. And to allow an entity that we have created for ourselves to find itself above the law and above the people who created it is mind-boggling. And Brooke, you have worked hard with your administration to try to bring us into compliance, and I appreciate that effort. But I cannot, as a representative of District 2 and the city of Chattanooga, deliver something that is an impotent paper tiger, to quote my District 2 representative on the park board. That's all, Chair.
Any other council member would like to?
Make a quick, just a quick, in
Madam
regards
Chair.
to. Oh, yeah, in regards to Madam Vice Chair Hill, we do vote on this next week. So I
Next
just want everybody
week.
to be clear.
All right.
Just in case it came up and they were like, oh, you know, it's okay.
And I'm here next week. That's all week after. We're doing a roll call vote.
I think, Madam Chair, I think we are voting on this week, tonight.
The 8th?
This is a,
First read.
The first read is tonight.
The
Yeah.
first
Oh, okay, okay.
yes. First read is tonight.
Let's fail it.
And let me just point out, this is not to disband Park, and I just want to make sure we're clear on what this ordinance does. And Madam Clerk, would you, and I probably should have done this at the very first, would you read this ordinance, and just so that we're clear on what this vote is about tonight?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, my light is, I hit it, but it's disabled, so may I?
Yes, we'll get back to you in just a minute.
Okay, thank you so much, yes. So, last but not least, here to speak. I'm just curious, I don't know, how many people here are gambling individuals?
Me, I gamble.
Can I get
Where it's legal at.
a show of hands? Okay, so 7 versus 9. I'm willing to say 8 is one of those too.
that will not be represented. So just food for thought.
Madam Clerk, I think that's, everybody has had their turn. Madam Clerk, would you read the ordinance for tonight?
An ordinance to amend Chattanooga City Code, Part 2, Chapter 16, Sections 16-59 through 16-66, relative to the Police Advisory and Review Committee, by instituting a moratorium on the application of Sections 16-59 through 16-66 of City Code for a period beginning immediately from the effective date of this ordinance up to and including October 29, 2023.
All right, so council, just to be clear and just so that we have the facts, this is a moratorium, it's a pause button that we're going to place on the work of Park so that CPD can go ahead and review committees that, review cases that they may have in the log. Much like we did short-term vacation rental, we didn't do away with short-term vacation rental. We paused it for a while. Did make some changes to it, but then brought it back. So this is just a pause up until October the 29th, just so we're clear. Mr. Attorney.
The reason that this pause was asked for, at least by our office on there, is because of the state legislation that has been passed. And the reason for at least the discussion here this evening is it says it's preempting you. And it's preempting any ordinance that is in existence as of January the 1st of 2023 that does not comply exactly with the requirements of the new law. And it says that unless you do something to comply and make it comply with this section within 120 days of July 1st of 2023, then that body that was created by our ordinance is terminated. So the reason we ask for the moratorium is to give you a little bit of chance to be able to make some revisions that you think will actually pass in the new law. So that is the concern, and to give you enough time to be able to make those changes.
Mr. Turley, let me ask you a question. In the event, let's just say we went on as business as usual.
Sure.
And then I guess the state would consider Park terminated. What powers would they have to affect that, or maybe what punitive reaction could happen?
Well, unless you adopt an ordinance more in compliance by 2/3 vote, which is different, you've not had that requirement before here, by October the 29th, arguably the state could say that your ordinance and your committee is not effectual. It is not in existence at that point in time. Anyone that was presented to a park committee for review, they could argue that action would not be appropriate. The concern, I guess, on the bottom line in here is if there's advice given to the chief before a final decision is made that's contrary to this law, could be argued that that would be improper.
So in court, some of those decisions could be overturned?
Yes, that's our concern.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was getting at.
May I have
The new state law, one last thing here on there, the new state law also prohibits anybody from engaging in anything while the internal affairs is continuing to occur. It also prohibits you from getting involved in anything if there's any threatened or actual civil proceedings going on, which is really pretty difficult in that law.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to tell you about.
Can you dress and drive while you're there?
Probably that would not be a problem. No.
That's not illegal?
All right, I'm gonna enable the queue, so if you, and I'm gonna clear it out.
I just have a question of clarification.
You're, okay.
Am I good? So let me get this straight, Phil.
Yes, ma'am.
So there's a deadline of October something. Or
October 29th, that's why I was trying to at least give you that deadline, at least to try to get something done.
So what I'm trying to figure out is, let's say we're working hard to comply.
Sure.
I'm not understanding why Park can't continue as it is while we're, quote, working hard to comply.
We can do that. We can continue to operate in that regard. The issue would be whether there would be some group of cases that would not be able to be heard by the department. If you remember, it also says that there is, I guess, anything that is not in effect as of January the 1st of 2023 is one of the concerns in connection with this. The park board would have no ability to consider anything prior to that date.
So if I'm understanding you correctly,
Yes, ma'am.
the person that would have a right to obviate an outcome would be a police officer that disagreed with an outcome?
Or it could be any individual that was at least involved in an incident with the police officer, or it could be an issue involving the media in connection with those cases.
And tell me what that means. That's that open meetings
Yes,
thing?
ma'am.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Chief? Come on. The real chief. Chief Murphy. I'm gonna put you in a little bit of a hot seat here, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I felt that coming.
Oh, yeah. How uncomfortable would you be proceeding without changes that comply with the law?
Yeah. My fear is the risk of us not complying with the law and somehow it gets disbanded altogether. That's my only fear. And I don't know if I'm, in any way realistic in that, but when I'm back here listening to it, I was kind of frightened. And I'm glad that we read it and, reread the proposed moratorium ordinance because that's my biggest fear. I don't want this to get disbanded because of us operating in a space where we're not trying to at least come into compliance with the law as it is now, while at the same time, if it is your pleasure to try to work on our capital in reference to making it some exclusionary rule for whether it be Chattanooga or anyone who feels the need that their process is working correctly. So my only stance in the matter is I don't want to risk losing Park in this manner. I think, in my opinion, doesn't matter, but I would rather just try to, I'd rather us try to come into compliance until we have someone who's able to make the decision that, we get at least excluded from some of the elements of the statute.
So I have had some discussion with our state legislature to try to explain some of the difficulties that they've placed upon us. I think the next opportunity to make some revisions would probably not be until February. My thought was we could operate in the space within the law and then try to get something changed in February that could more mirror what we were doing.
Right.
Or what we are doing currently.
That's what I was back there cringing in fear, hoping that we could maybe come to some type of agreement, at least temporarily. Let's try to operate within the parameters now.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm not sure if this question's for you, but Councilwoman Hill.
Well, I just had a thought. It's not what I put my light for, but I'm going to say them both. This law is around us creating a board. Is there any law against the police department creating the board?
No, ma'am.
I understand the public perception challenge that we have that you all from Park really brought up. I believe it was Ms. Jones who made the point, you've got a critical public with the self-regulating PD. That creates a very real challenge. But I do wonder, might that be an avenue that we could pursue, that Chattanooga Police Department creates its own?
That's,
Okay, that was just thought. That was not why I pushed my button.
Not after that
Everybody just
statement, no.
put your little
That
hat
might
on.
not work. You know, all I can say is you can trust me. That's all I
Yeah,
can say.
I mean, I get it, yeah. I'm just,
I don't know how much that's
I'm
worth,
trying to
but you
think,
can trust me.
you know, think differently. But the other question is, Phil, what kind of paperwork would we be filing to say to the state, this law is not okay, and send it in front of a judge and get this whole thing put on hold so they can fix it through the judiciary and we can continue on with business as usual?
You could either do a proclamation by the entire council to your legislative group, or some type of declaratory judgment action in court would be the methods. The concern you got right here is that the section in the law right now says that it preempts any local governing body, which is y'all, from making any ordinance or change to the law that is not consistent with what the state has done. So that section under 38.8.312 is the concern. That's what puts us on the deadline of 129 days.
So would we need a citizen group to file suit
The citizen group or the council
versus
could.
the council file suit?
Council could file suit.
Or we
a
could both
citizen.
file suit?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
you good?
Yes.
Councilwoman Coonrod?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, Phil.
Yes,
Like,
ma'am.
we get it, I mean, I understand what they're trying to do with the, a moratorium, but according to the legislation, it's saying that we have 120 days
Yes,
of July, which means after,
after July 1st.
to
Yes,
get it
ma'am.
done. So we got until November. We already a month behind.
We got
So
to do
we-
something by October 29th by my calculation. That's the reason that keeps coming up.
If it's 120 days, so that wouldn't push us to November the 1st?
July, well, I wanted to hope you got your ordinance passed by the 29th. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we could still operate under, like Councilwoman has stated, that we can continue operating while they administration could, no, because we got to be in compliance before 121 days. So while the mayor's office are gathering whatever legislation they're gonna do, we can still, because we have to be in compliance by 120 days.
No, ma'am, the law went into effect on July 1st, and it gives you 120 days to come into compliance, or else the body is terminated. That's the concern.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, by 120 days since July the 1st. It's just August. We can still go to the end of October and be in compliance, because by that time, they're gonna provided us with information on what they would like to see. So we don't really have to stop it while they do the work.
The way that your body is conducting its meetings would have to change dramatically between now and then.
Okay, so we have the ability to
question is,
suspend our
and-
rules.
Let me see if I can,
Okay.
is there a reason that Park cannot continue to operate?
It's not a
I
reason.
think you read something a while ago about Park hearing matters that date back to January of
Yeah, there's a
2023.
specific limitation on anything that is before, I think, January the 1st of 2023, on any items that occurred on that. And then there is limitations upon what the body can do based upon anything where there is any pending legal matters involved or any criminal matters involved.
And whether or not it's successful or not, right now we have, I think, about 42 cases that are in limbo. And if we were to hear them, regardless of whether it's successful or not, we're talking about the potential of that many lawsuits to add kind of a little more frustration to the system and what we're really trying to accomplish. And if I'm mistaken, please, City Attorney, let me know. I believe that those 40-something cases can be heard after we've come into compliance or it's developed. They could still hear those cases after the fact, correct? So it's not that the moratorium is skipping anything. It's just, allowing the process to run through, and then they can still hear those cases after the fact. Now, when I spoke to dealing with an executive director in my previous role, There were times when, because they did an investigation after, or it was parallel to ours, but it was independent. And so this is a little different model, I get that. But there were absolutely times where I myself even opened something based off of their recommendations after we've closed our investigation. So I don't see anything yet that makes us not have that, giving them the teeth that, that matters in all of this. And we don't know still what our model looks like, but I just want us to be careful, because at the end of the day, my only concern is that if we split hairs on how we do this until we're forced into compliance, my fear is that we do something that, we're not considering right now, that's going to completely demolish the unit. That's my fear, and that's, I'm not swaying anybody in any direction on that. I'm just letting you know that that's my fear.
Chief, I want to follow up with a question right quick. Councilor Smith, I apologize, we're taking into planning and zoning, but I think this is something that we need to get clear and we need to understand this afternoon. Chief, there's about 40 cases. You said they're in limbo, meaning Park cannot hear those currently. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that 40-something cases are affected by with which we're talking about this moratorium, will be affected by, if the moratorium goes in place, they will stand with, we'll do the process of our disciplinary hearings similar to what coming into compliance with the state law. And those 40 cases will not be seen by Park before the decision is made by the department. But that does not stop them from being heard once the compliance is brought into place and the mandate is put into place. Those 40-something cases can still then be heard by Park. It's just under the new model as opposed to the old model. It's not skipping those cases. We're just going ahead and being compliant with it now.
Let me see if I can rephrase it, because what I hear is a question on this council: why do we need a moratorium? Why can't we continue to operate until October the 29th?
And I absolutely say we don't have to not hear those cases the way we've been hearing them. The way I see it is my concern about the risk that if we continue doing it without coming into immediate compliance, and my opinion is not necessarily the best advice. My risk on the matter is that it's going to bring some type of frustration due to possible lawsuits from those 40 cases or individuals that are affected by those cases, whether they have a chance or not in being successful. It will frustrate the system if all of these lawsuits are brought on because of it, just challenging it.
Okay. So really the moratorium revolves around these 40 cases.
It just happens to be so those are the ones that have not been heard yet, and that's the number that we're at, yes.
Yes, okay.
But those are the ones that are already in the holding pattern for them to see.
Right.
We're going to continue doing our disciplinary process
Yes.
without Park, so there'll be more cases.
So the moratorium allows CPD to go ahead and hear these cases and
Correct.
Move this down the road.
Correct.
And then New Park would hear them on the back end.
If they so choose, yes.
If that's the way we go.
But they can hear them now
Okay.
if we just continue to do the work.
Ms. Satterfield, did you have something to add?
Yes, I think, I was going to expand on what Chief Murphy said, but I think you summed it up. Currently, the ordinance, our current park ordinance, has Park as being a step in the process before a final disposition is made by the chief and disciplinary action is handed out. The moratorium, the pause on the park ordinance would be just that, a pause, so that the department can proceed through the disciplinary or the investigation and disciplinary process, and provide the final disposition and hand out disciplinary action as necessary.
Okay. Thank you. Councilwoman Burris.
Phil,
Yes, ma'am.
during this interim, can Park become
the Chiefs Advisory Committee?
They clearly can provide advice to the chief. The chief can ask any
No,
park
I'm
members.
just saying.
Yes, ma'am.
If the current park as constituted is in moratorium, can the chief have an advisory committee?
The danger you have in the state legislation, it says the committee or its staff shall not review any investigation prior to the closure of the investigation by the internal affairs unit or of a criminal investigation. If
So they've
that-
totally gotten rid of the concept of citizen involvement
Before the decision of the chief.
before the decision is made. So in other words, if you choose to serve on a park committee as the state would have it, it's illusory, correct?
It is clearly an advice after the decision is made by the chief of what might be done better later, but it is not the
That
input
not put
that's
the
going
chief
down.
in a very bad position?
It clearly puts the Citizens Review Committee looking at it after the chief has made a decision and saying whether they think it's wrong.
Okay. Yeah, no.
All right, we're good?
Yeah, no, but yeah.
Well, has everybody, all right, we have one more, Councilwoman Coonrod.
You know what, I ain't got my lawyer certifications yet, but in a class that I took, like this of word means afterwards. So I'm not sure why we're with this moratorium. Like, if we got 120 days, we just now getting the information, like, boom, here it is. Put on our agenda to discuss. We got 120 days. If we get it from who's ever working on it, in the mayor's office, if they get it to us in time to be placed on the agenda, we will be in compliance with whatever it is. So we should be able to move forward with the park, with those 40 cases still being heard while they're working on it. It shouldn't be paused just for them to work on anything. Because they work on stuff all the time. They don't need a pause to complete what tasks they need to do for us to come into compliance. We don't get a pause. So I'm just simply saying, we can move forward still. We don't have to have that moratorium in place. I know Jermaine gonna come up here and try to convince us otherwise, but just a reminder, we're the legislative body. We're the legislative body here. They can still complete their task by gathering whatever they need to gather to be in compliance while we're still operating to get these 40 cases heard. That, it doesn't make sense to place the moratorium on it when we got 120 days to be in compliance.
You good, Councilwoman?
Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Freeman, do you have some facts that would help us in making a decision on this moratorium tonight?
Yes, I think the question that's coming before you that I think has been sort of hard for the council to understand is that what we are concerned about is that if you allow for cases to be heard by Park in its current iteration, and there are decisions that are made about those cases in its current iteration, then you essentially open the city up for lawsuits in the event that there is that someone who does not agree with the disposition of a case could say that a case made its way through Park after the state law was passed and before Park was reconstituted to be in conformance and in compliance with the state law. And so the concern from the administration is whether or not there is any legal liability during the process during this time period in which we are trying to get Park into compliance. So that, I think, is the point that we're trying to make. We completely understand the frustration that the council is expressing and articulating, and we also completely understand where the Park members are coming from. And we didn't choose this. But what we are saying is that in order to protect the city, we do have a concern, and our attorney can speak to this, is that if there are cases that make their way through this process, knowing that a state law was passed state law went into effect on July 1st, then is there legal liability for the city should there be an officer or someone who disagrees with the outcome of the case. That's the concern of the administration. Phil, please speak to that. If
Hold on 1 second. I've got, Councilwoman Hill has got a question or a comment. Councilwoman Coonrod, if you want a question, hit your line.
I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that the vote in front of us really is a question of what is more valuable? Giving our citizens, our community, a voice in order to protect the city and keep our citizens safe and to protect our police officers? Or is it more important in this moment to protect the city from the potential future lawsuits? And that's a vote that we make on a weekly basis.
yes.
The lawsuit part, not the community safety piece. But your point about in order to protect the city, what is better protecting the city in this moment? That's what I'll be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Councilwoman Burrs, before I get to you and I see your light, Phil, let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
The requirement for the park to meet publicly,
Yes.
that is a law right now. In other words, if park met tomorrow, it would have to be in public, correct?
Correct.
So any cases that they discuss from today forward will have to be in public.
Yes, sir.
That's the only way that they could meet currently is in public.
Yes, sir.
So I think maybe that's really the whole reason for the moratorium or the pause, is because if they did hear these cases, they would have to be heard in public. That's something that we don't want to put our police department through, is the public airing of this. So if they meet, they would have to meet publicly, and if they didn't, then they could, I'm assuming, they could be sued, just like we're being sued.
Yes, sir.
For violating the Opens Meeting Act, correct?
Yes, sir.
So we actually put park in danger of being sued by them not being in compliance with the law as it currently stands.
Your current ordinance and the state law at least say that I guess the executive director, if there's one that's created for this body, may request legal services and advice from the attorney for the local government entity that provides legal services to the local government for which the executive director is employed. So in that regard, it's putting all that on our office, the city attorney's office, which advises this board on how things work. I could not put either of these entities, the park board nor y'all, at risk without giving you advice on the front end of it, that would be potentially an open meetings violation for them to occur without that occurring. So that's what I would be doing, hopefully, in my job.
Councilwoman Burrs?
Jermaine,
Yes, ma'am.
so the final decision about behavior or police behavior has never been Parks, it's been the chiefs.
Correct.
So help me understand why the city would face more danger of being sued now than, I mean, I could care less about lawsuits, you know?
Sure. Yes.
My point is, I don't think you make decisions in fear.
Sure.
So, I'm really trying to understand, and I heard what you said, I get it.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would we be more at risk now than, because Park has never had the final decision.
Sure.
It's always, so if the chief asks for input from a citizens group, why would we be more in danger? I need some help here, because the final decision is the chief's.
Sure.
And she makes very good decisions. I'm trying to figure out.
I can't say with the certainty that you will be more at risk. I can't say that. All that I can say is that as a public servant and as someone who is charged, just like you all, with looking out for our constituents and the city itself as an
Sure.
institution, My job is just to tell you where the dangers lie around the corner. So I can't tell you that beyond a certainty that you will be more at risk of liability. I'm just simply, and I'm not an attorney, and you know more about law than I do, but I'm just saying that I think in our discussions, that is a fear that we have, is that does this open us up for more legal liability if we are knowingly adjudicating cases in contravention of a law that is in effect? And that is a question for the council to consider, but that's me as a public servant trying to do my due diligence to warn you.
Sure, I
That's
get
all.
that.
Yes.
What I'm hearing is that if the chief asks for input from a citizens committee, which is what's happening now,
Yes, ma'am.
before she makes the final decision,
Yes, ma'am.
that for some reason, there's an idea that we would be more in jeopardy, and that's not computing with me, and that's one of my concerns. Phil, the other concern is if Park were to go on, and I'm following up on the chair's comments.
Yes, ma'am.
If Park were to go on as usual, then as usual isn't as usual, because you're saying now all of their meetings would have to be public.
Yes, ma'am, and there's got to be an open opportunity for people to come to those meetings and speak.
And even though they're not a policy-making committee.
Yes, ma'am.
So are you saying that we're there now anyway? And if you are, then I go back to Councilwoman Coonrod's question. If they have to meet in public and do all this stuff now, and if the final decision is the chief's, irrespective what the model is, I'm not sure why they may choose to disband simply because they can't do anything, because that's their choice. But I'm wondering why they would have to disband, why the moratorium? And that's just going on in my head now. It's not computing. I hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Reason for a moratorium in my mind is to give you a little chance to be able to try to sort through some of these items before October the 29th, because you've been given a short fuse here by the state. You've got to try to figure out what can you do legally within that time frame. How can this body meet legally and comply with those terms based upon any tweaks that we can do to the state law?
And shouldn't the council be doing exactly what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
In public, doing this thinking without the moratorium?
You can, as long as you can get everything done by October the 29th. Yes, ma'am.
And we are the legislative body.
You are the legislative body. You are the local governing body.
Okay, thank you.
That does result in taking up a lot of time on your other issues.
And this is a very big issue. Thank you.
And I would just add, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Chief.
That we do not want to put the police department in the predicament of seeming as if they are now not complying with state law. They are the police department. They enforce laws. So I think that we're also very sort of concerned about the optics and the perception of our police department not being in compliance with state law. So as we consider this, and as the council weighs its decision, and it is your decision to make, that is one thing that I would also just sort of articulate to the council. And I think, Chief.
So not specifically that, I hope we're not, the moratorium is not fashioning itself around just these 40 cases, because if at the end of the 120 days, we're mandated to do this anyway, then we'll put these 40 cases that we're saying, let's go ahead and muscle through. If we're mandated to do this at the end anyway, my question is, why risk those 40 cases? That's all I'm saying, because if we end up having to do this anyway, and then let's say, best case scenario, we end up not, then those 40 cases can still go through the process which we end up having, to deal with, whatever that looks like. So I'm just, this is not about these 40 cases. This is really just about the department being in compliance with state law. And I don't have an opinion in the matter on how you all vote on it.
Councilwoman Coonrod?
Thank you, Chair. Chief Murphy, how long has those 40 cases been in the pipeline to be heard?
So it varies, ma'am. We have cases, we have approximately one case from 2021, we have about 13 cases from 2022, and the remaining are from 2023.
Okay, so it ain't no guarantee when they'll be.
So we also have, so the 40 is what is currently waiting in the queue for Park to hear. We have an additional 35 to 37 cases that are still pending in the investigative process prior to Park.
Okay.
So if we're pausing, then just understanding the scope of this, you're talking about through end of October, it could potentially double between now and then. You'd be looking at over 100 cases.
Okay, thank you for just shedding the light on that. But for me, it's not even about the 40 cases. For me, it's about this legislation strictly says we got 120 days. You can, look, I'm good at putting my attorney hat on. Now, if you're gonna strip, they already saying that council ain't gonna have no authority after this 120 days, we come into compliance. But before that, we still got the authority. That's Phil, and I know you feel like you straddling the fence because you work for both of us.
Yes,
but
ma'am.
right now, at the agenda session at 6 o'clock, you work for us. you on our side.
Yes, ma'am.
I get that what the administration, they gonna get on you a little bit, but at the end of the day, this law says we got 120 days to come into compliance. That's what that tells us. That means we can still operate the regular way. If these cases from 2021 comes up to be heard, they can still hear those cases. If they don't, they can still be in the backlog like they've been since 2021, some of them. And Jermaine and his crew can work on whatever ordinance to get us into compliance. It's right here. This is what it says. Now, I feel like we don't have to let them muscle us this time, just like they do every other time, to get something done. Listen, it may cost me a sidewalk, but guess what? I'm willing to give up that sidewalk because I ain't doing nothing else. So at the end of the day, this is what the legislation say. This is what it say. We got 120 days to come into compliance. Until then, we still operate on, ain't nobody gonna sue. If that's the case, they would have been sued. They've been waiting since 2021 anyway. Now we scared they gonna sue us. We have people sue the city all the time. Somebody go out and fall on the sidewalk, they suing us. It can happen in somebody other city, they still wanna come to Chattanooga and sue us. The police officers in East Ridge can beat them down, they come in the city of Chattanooga about the complaints. So this ain't nothing new. We got 120 days to do our job, to come into compliance, which Jermaine and his crew, they'll be working on it, and then they bring it to council. Then we ready to move forward. I mean, I don't understand what the issue is.
You good, Councilwoman?
But it's up now, because I feel like, listen, at least let me keep my voice for this part. They already gonna strip it away in 120 days.
Yeah, thank you. Councilman Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil, I'm going to do my best to ask you to answer as short as possible and ask you these questions.
I will try, yes, sir.
As of right now, today, after the passage of state law, is it a violation of state law for Park to hear cases or be apprised of the details of those cases that have not had a decision rendered upon them?
If they do so, it has to be done in a public meeting with an opportunity for anyone to appear. The confidentiality that they may have of the reports that are given to them by IA and all of the body cam and video in those cases would also be subject to being reviewed, which is confidential under state law.
So I'm going to keep rephrasing this question.
Yes.
Because you didn't answer his.
Park cannot review confidential information without violating state law, yes or no?
Not in a public meeting, yes.
Confidential meaning it can't be done in a public meeting.
Correct.
So they cannot review confidential information without violating state law.
Yes, sir.
So there is no way for Park to operate for 120 days in its current form. Yes or no?
Not if they review any documentation.
Which is what they do today.
Yes.
So what is possibly confusing is that the 120 days is to come into compliance. However, state law immediately prohibits current function as well as providing 120 days to come into compliance and better shape your park committee, correct?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if that makes it any clearer, but unfortunately, I don't disagree with my colleagues of the frustration. We all worked really, really hard to make this work, and it clearly does. But at the end of the day, I'd be happy to ask for a show of hands of the park committee that's here, but I'm guessing, purely guessing, there aren't many of you that are willing to violate state law in order to continue to operate. Would I be wrong in that? No. So doesn't really make sense for us to tell them to continue to operate. They're not going to, because they're not going to violate state law. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Smith. I do not see any other lights, and we may have more discussion at our 6 o'clock meeting. Councilwoman, our council chair, do you want to adjourn to planning and zoning? Yeah. So we will adjourn our public safety committee meeting and go into planning and zoning.
Of course, this is the week that I get to do planning and zoning. So we will try to make this as quick and painless as possible, council. I'm not even going to wait for the room to clear. All right, we'll call to order our planning and zoning committee. Do you have a motion on the minutes? I have a motion and a second. Without opposition, minutes will stand as recorded. Karen, are you ready for the fastest planning and zoning committee we've had in a really, really long time?
I am. I can give 2 quick updates and not show slides, just to get through.
That sounds great. Let me start off with one thing before you do. We have first reading on this week's agenda. We've got 3 items on here that had been deferred. I do want to offer my colleagues any option of asking questions or making statements about those 3 items before we move into next week.
I do have an update on one of those items for Councilman Knoll.
Okay, please.
Okay, so number 57 on your agenda was deferred in May. The applicant originally proposed a larger scale building, 6 units, 3 stories. It got deferred for him to kind of revise his plan. He now has a revised plan that's 4 units, 2 stories, and the applicant has some conditions that he has discussed with the neighborhood. I believe that these reflect the desire moving forward, and so case 57 revised conditions would be residential use only, 4 townhouse units maximum, 2-story height maximum, South Greenwood primary street facing entry door, a South Greenwood 10-foot setback, and Bennett Avenue a 7-foot setback minimum. So that was ready to move forward with those conditions, and I can pass those along to Phil and the clerk. And then the other item that I'll discuss briefly is on first reading next week, and that's number 221, 213. We discussed this briefly at Planning and Zoning Committee. This was tabled in early 2022, was brought off the table at Planning and Zoning Committee, and it is the alternate version, reflects the conditions condition after much discussion with CDOT and the applicant. Councilman Ledford has also been involved in this. So their alternate version has the desired revised condition moving forward, and basically it's action would lift a lot of very specific transportation conditions, and the alternate version's new condition is a traffic impact study will be submitted for determining warranted improvements. So it defers it to a larger study instead of kind of some specific action that may no longer apply. So those are the only 2 items. I know that a couple other items under tonight's agenda have had some action.
Just one second.
I'll defer.
Chairwoman Dotley, did you have a question? before?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Item number 2023-0085, I'll be asking for, or if somebody could, ask for a deferral till September the 12th. That's all.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Ms. Rennick, go ahead.
And that's it. So just two minor updates, and just, I believe there's been maybe some additional activity on C on tonight's agenda, but I will defer to the council member for that.
Councilwoman, are you good on that?
That's it.
I don't see any lights, so either everybody's hungry or you did a marvelous job.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are adjourned.